Elara Miles paced the gleaming corridors of Serenity Station, her footsteps echoing softly against the metal walls. She adjusted the sensor pad on her wrist, checking the vitals of her patient, Governor Pelion, displayed in luminescent blue. The calm before a storm, she mused, unaware of how true her thoughts would soon prove. In her guise as a nurse, Elara blended seamlessly into the background of the bustling medical facility. However, beneath the sterile facade of her medical scrubs lay the honed instincts of a galactic operative trained for situations far beyond the ordinary. As she entered Governor Pelion's room, her eyes swept the area, a habit drilled into her from countless covert missions. "Good morning, Governor," Elara greeted, her voice a soothing balm. "How are we feeling today?" The governor, a middle-aged man with a stern visage softened by illness, managed a weak smile. "Better, thanks to your care, Nurse Miles." As she administered a carefully measured dose of medication, her communicator vibrated against her skin. Excusing herself, she stepped into the adjoining supply room, tapping the device hidden beneath her sleeve. The message was stark: Priority 1 threat detected. Immediate action required. Elara's mind shifted gears instantly. The hospital, a cover for her real duties, was now the front line. She tapped a quick acknowledgement, her fingers flying over the communicator with practiced ease. Returning to her patient, her demeanor unchanged, she continued her routine checkups, all while her senses remained alert to any anomaly. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, Dax Corvin received the details of his new contract through encrypted channels. His target, Governor Pelion. The job was straightforward, the kind he liked. No complications, just a clean kill. As he geared up, his thoughts didn't dwell on the morality of his actions. It was just another job, and he was the best. Back on Serenity Station, Elara monitored the station's security feeds discreetly. Her dual role was a lonely path, chosen and necessitated by a past that had taught her the hard cost of peace. She noticed an unfamiliar face cycling through the visitor logs, a face that didn't match the usual patterns of illness and grief. Her suspicion piqued, she decided to take a closer walk through the public areas. As she walked, her trained eyes missed nothing. A group of tourists clustered around a guide, a family huddled in worried conversation, a lone man reading a datapad. None seemed out of place at first glance, yet her instincts screamed caution. She approached the reception desk, her voice low. "Can you show me the visitor log for today?" she asked the receptionist, who nodded and turned the screen towards her. Elara scanned the names, stopping at one. Max Revan. "Checked in 15 minutes ago," she read aloud, her brain cataloging and dismissing. "A pseudonym, perhaps?" Her gut told her it was Dax. "Thank you," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. Turning away, she tapped her communicator, sending a silent alert to her team. Something was off, and she intended to find out what. In the depths of the station, Dax made his way through less frequented corridors. His steps were quiet, calculated to avoid drawing attention. The layout of the station was in his mind, studied and memorized from the schematics he had acquired. He found what he was looking for, a service elevator that led to the medical floors. He slipped inside, his hand resting on the blaster concealed under his coat. The elevator dinged softly on the medical floor, and he stepped out into the antiseptic smell of the hospital. Here, he was just another visitor, his face calm, his heart rate steady. He made his way towards the governor's room, passing nurses and doctors absorbed in their duties. Elara, feeling the pulse of the station change, moved towards the governor's room. She arrived just in time to see a figure pause at the door. Her training took over. She stepped forward, her voice authoritative yet calm. "Can I help you?" she asked, her eyes locking with Dax's. There was a moment of recognition, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, quickly masked. "Just looking for the restroom," Dax replied smoothly, his voice betraying nothing of his intent. "Down the hall, to your left," Elara directed, her eyes not leaving his. He nodded, a tight smile on his lips, and moved away. As Dax retreated, Elara's communicator buzzed again. The message was clear: suspect confirmed. Maintain surveillance. She knew the game had changed. No longer just a protector, she was now a hunter. Alara returned to the governor's room, her mind racing with scenarios. She reassured the governor, her presence a steady constant as she planned her next move. The chase had begun, and she was ready. In the chessboard of galactic intrigue, she was a queen, moving with purpose and power, her next moves critical. The chapter closed on Alara adjusting the settings on her communicator to maximum surveillance, her eyes reflecting the steel of her resolve. The hunt was on, and she was not just a participant, she was the master of the game. Alara Miles monitored the security feeds with a hunter's focus, her eyes tracing the paths Dax Corvin might take to reach Governor Pelion. She knew her adversary was cautious, his movements calculated to avoid detection. Her station, once a sanctuary of healing, had morphed into a battlefield where each corridor could hide a threat. In her small, utilitarian office tucked away behind the main medical wards, Alara prepared her tools of trade, not scalpels and syringes, but encrypted communicators, a compact blaster, and surveillance disruptors. She was a medic and a warrior, each role as crucial as the other in the unfolding drama. She stepped out, her demeanor composed, the very picture of a dedicated nurse. But beneath that calm exterior, her senses were alert, scanning for any sign of Dax's approach. The station's bustling activity provided the perfect cover for both hunter and hunted. Meanwhile, Dax moved through the lesser-known maintenance tunnels of Serenity Station. His presence in the hospital had been a calculated risk to test Alara's awareness and the station's security protocols. Now, he was the shadow in the periphery, using his knowledge of the station's layout to plan his next move. His communicator buzzed silently, a message from his anonymous employer urging him to expedite the assassination. Dax ignored the pressure, focusing instead on the intricate dance of cat and mouse. In his line of work, haste could lead to mistakes, and mistakes were fatal. Alara convened a brief meeting with her security team, a specialized unit disguised as hospital staff. "Keep your eyes open and your cover intact," she instructed. "We can't spook him into making a rash move, especially not with the governor still vulnerable." As she patrolled the area, Alara's communicator vibrated with an alert from the surveillance team. "Target sighted in Sector 7G, the voice crackled quietly in her earpiece. Without hesitation, she headed towards the location, her strides purposeful yet discreet. Reaching Sector 7G, Alara found herself in the quieter parts of the hospital, where the hum of machinery drowned out the distant sounds of medical emergencies. She paused, her trained ears picking up the faintest shuffle of footsteps from around the corner. Cautiously, she peered around, only to find a janitor obliviously mopping the floor. She exhaled softly, not out of relief, but to steady herself for continued pursuit. Her next step was to lay a trap. She accessed the hospital's mainframe from a secure terminal, sending a false alert of a medical emergency in the governor's room. It was bait, likely too obvious for Dax to fall for, but it would force him into action, either to advance or to retreat. Dax, receiving the same alert through his hacked access to the hospital's systems, smirked. "Too easy," he murmured, recognizing the ploy. Opting for an alternative route, he decided to bypass the main corridors, using the hospital's old service lifts that were seldom monitored. Alara anticipated this might happen. She positioned her team at strategic exits, herself taking up a post where she could intercept Dax. Her heart beat steadily, her training holding the adrenaline at bay. This was the moment of truth. The lift's doors slid open with a soft hiss, and Dax stepped out, immediately sensing the trap. He scanned the area, his eyes catching the slight movement of a curtain in the peripheral. With no time to ponder, he darted back into the lift, pressing the button for another floor. But Alara was already moving. She sprinted towards the lift, her blaster drawn and ready. As she rounded the corner, Dax spotted her, a brief moment where their gazes locked and decisions were made. Instead of firing, Alara threw a stun grenade into the lift. The enclosed space amplified the effect, and Dax stumbled out, disoriented but not defeated. "Stop!" Alara commanded, aiming her blaster at him. Dax, recovering faster than she anticipated, launched himself towards her in a desperate bid for escape. They collided, the impact sending Alara sprawling to the ground. Dax regained his footing and sprinted away, disappearing into a maze of corridors. Picking herself up, Alara cursed silently. She was trained for combat, but Dax was proving to be as formidable as he was elusive. She contacted her team, updating them on the situation. He's heading towards the eastern wing. Cut him off. The chase resumed, a relentless pursuit that had Alara weaving through the hospital's labyrinthine structure. She was close behind him now, every instinct honed on capturing her target. As Dax rounded another corner, he found his path blocked by 2 security officers disguised as medical staff. With no way forward, he turned, only to see Alara approaching, her blaster steady in her hand. "End of the line, Dax," she said, her voice even but firm. Dax assessed his options, his back against a sterile wall adorned with health posters. With a defiant glare, he raised his hands in mock surrender. "For now, nurse," he conceded, the title spoken with a sneer. Alara's eyes didn't waver from his as she approached, her communicator buzzing with updates and instructions. This was far from over, but for the moment, the immediate threat was contained. The chapter concluded with Dax in temporary custody, his fate hanging in the balance, and Alara's resolve as firm as ever. The game of cat and mouse had escalated, and she was ready for whatever came next. The detention room was stark, the only light emanating from the harsh overhead lamps that cast long shadows across the cold, metallic floor. Dax Corvin sat on a minimalist steel chair, his wrists secured by magnetic restraints. Across from him, Alara Miles observed him with a scrutinizing gaze, her mind cycling through the next steps of her interrogation. "Dax Corvin," Alara began, her voice calm yet carrying an unmistakable edge of authority, "you're a long way from just another simple extraction or assassination. What made you take a contract on a Galactic Union governor?" Dax's eyes flickered with a hint of amusement. "You think knowing my employer changes anything? We're just pawns in a larger game, Alara." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing not in anger but in calculated scrutiny. "Except pawns don't plan 3 steps ahead. They don't infiltrate high-security space stations unnoticed." "Who sent you?" Dax sighed, a sound more of resignation than surrender. "Look around, Alara. We're surrounded by wars fought in the shadows. Secrets are the currency of the universe. You know that better than anyone." Alara paused, her mind processing his words. She knew he was trying to divert the conversation, yet his mention of secrets struck closer to home than she preferred. She changed her approach, her tone softening. "You were once a Federation pilot, a hero of the border skirmishes. What turned you into a gun for hire?" Dax's demeanor shifted, a shadow passing over his features. "War changes a man. It shows you that ideals are just another form of currency. And when the war ended, the Federation had no use for a pilot with a conscience." His words resonated with Alara, pulling at the threads of her own past. She remembered the devastation of her home planet, the loss that had propelled her into her dual life. She understood the transformation of pain into purpose, yet her path had led to protection, not destruction. "Why target Governor Pelion?" she pressed, steering the conversation back to the immediate matter. "He's a symbol," Dax responded, his tone flat. "A symbol of a system that thinks it can control the chaos. Toppling him sends a message." Alara realized then that Dax wasn't merely an assassin, he was an anarchist in his own right. This mission was personal for him, a distorted mirror to her own motivations. "Who benefits from sending that message, Dax?" she asked, her voice a whisper of steel. Dax smiled, a grim twist of lips. "Sometimes chaos is its own reward." Alara stood up, her movements deliberate. "This isn't just about chaos. It's about shifting power. Who are you working for, Dax?" He looked up at her, his eyes sharp. "You think you're protecting the galaxy. But ask yourself, Alara, from what? Or better, from whom?" The interrogation was interrupted by a sudden alert on Alara's communicator. She glanced at it, her expression unreadable. "We're not done here," she said, turning to leave the room. Dax watched her go, his smirk fading into a thoughtful frown. Outside, Alara was met by her lieutenant, a young officer named Karis. "Commander, we've got a situation. Surveillance picked up a breach in the outer sector. It looks like another team has arrived." "Another team?" Alara mused, her thoughts racing. Was Dax merely a distraction? Armed and moving with purpose. "They're heading towards the central hub," Karis reported, her own concern evident. Alara's mind worked furiously. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was troubling. Secure the governor. Lock down the station. "I'm going to handle this." Armed with her blaster and the weight of impending conflict heavy on her shoulders, Alara moved through the corridors of Serenity Station with renewed purpose. Each step brought her closer to a confrontation she hoped to avoid but knew was inevitable. As she approached the central hub, the sound of disruptor fire echoed through the halls. She rounded a corner to see a group of mercenaries exchanging fire with her security team. Without hesitation, she joined the fray, her blaster steady in her hands. The battle was brief but intense. When the last of the intruders was subdued, Alara knelt beside one, searching him for any clue to their mission. She found a data chip and a symbol emblazoned on his uniform, a symbol she recognized all too well. It was the insignia of a rogue faction known for its radical opposition to the Galactic Union's policies. As she stood, the weight of the situation settled upon her like a cloak. This was bigger than one assassin, one governor. This was about the very stability of the galaxy. She returned to Dax, her approach now not just as an interrogator but as someone seeking understanding. "This isn't just about Pelion, is it?" she asked, her voice heavy. "This is about starting a war." Dax met her gaze, his own filled with a complex mix of defiance and resignation. "Sometimes wars are necessary for change," he said simply. Alara considered his words, her mind a whirlwind of duty and doubt. "Not like this, Dax. Not at the cost of innocent lives." The chapter closed with Alara looking down at the data chip in her hand, the burden of her next decisions heavier than ever. As she contemplated the paths before her, she realized that the line between friend and foe was blurring, and the true battle was just beginning. The command center of Serenity Station had transformed into a war room overnight. Maps and live feeds from surveillance cameras illuminated the stark walls, casting an eerie glow over the faces of Alara Miles and her team. The tension was palpable, stakes had never been higher. Alara stood before the main screen, her eyes tracing the routes marked in luminous blue. "We need to flush them out," she declared, her voice firm despite the underlying strain. "Set up perimeters here, here, and here," she instructed, pointing to strategic locations on the map. "They won't give up easily." Her lieutenant, Karis, nodded in acknowledgement, her fingers flying over the console to relay commands. The plan was simple yet risky: corner the rogue faction before they could execute whatever phase of their plot remained. Meanwhile, in a nondescript detention room, Dax Corvin sat alone, his thoughts a turbulent mix of regret and resolve. The sounds of boots and distant orders filtered in, a constant reminder of the chaos he had helped unleash. When the door hissed open, he wasn't surprised to see Alara entering, her expression unreadable. "We need to talk, Dax," Alara began, her tone indicating this wasn't just another interrogation. She took a seat opposite him, her demeanor more of a wary ally than a captor. "This goes beyond Pelion, beyond even this station." "You know it does." Dax met her gaze, the fire of conviction in his eyes undimmed. "I told you, Alara, change requires sacrifice." "Sacrifice doesn't mean innocent lives," Alara countered sharply. "It doesn't have to mean war." Dax leaned forward, his voice lowering. "What would you have me do, then? Stand by while the Union crushes dissent?" Alara sighed, the weight of her role heavier than ever. "Help me stop them. Help me prevent a war. You were a hero once, Dax. You can be again." For a long moment, Dax was silent, his mind racing with possibilities and past regrets. Finally, he nodded slowly. "I'll help you, but not for the Union. for those out there who still believe things can be better. With Dax's reluctant agreement, Alara formulated a plan to use his knowledge of the rogue faction's tactics and personnel. Together, they laid out a strategy that could end the standoff without further bloodshed. The operation began at dawn. Alara led a tactical team, moving stealthily through the lower levels of the station where the last members of the rogue faction were believed to be hiding. Dax, closely guarded but cooperative, provided real-time guidance, predicting their movements almost before they happened. As they approached the suspected stronghold, the sound of low conversation reached their ears. Alara signaled her team to hold, her eyes scanning for any sign of an ambush. With a nod from Dax, they breached the room. The ensuing confrontation was swift but tense. Members of the rogue faction, surprised but quickly regaining their composure, reached for their weapons. "Hold your fire," Alara commanded, her voice echoing in the suddenly silent room. "We're not here to kill. We're here to end this peacefully." The leader of the faction, a hardened veteran with scars that spoke of many battles, eyed Alara warily. "Why should we trust you?" he challenged. "Because I brought him," Alara replied, stepping aside to reveal Dax. Murmurs of recognition and disbelief rippled through the room. Dax stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. "I know what you want: change, recognition, respect. War isn't the way. It only leads to more loss, more pain." After tense negotiations, agreements were reached. The rogue faction would stand down, their grievances to be addressed through formal channels with guarantees of amnesty. Alara watched as former enemies shook hands, a fragile peace-taking form. With the crisis averted, Alara and Dax stood looking out at the stars from the observation deck of the station. "You think it will hold?" Dax asked, his voice tinged with a mix of hope and skepticism. "It has to," Alara responded, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "For all our sakes." The chapter closed with Alara returning to her duties, her steps lighter yet burdened with the knowledge of the delicate peace she had helped forge. Dax watched her go, a faint smile crossing his lips, perhaps for the first time feeling a sense of purpose beyond the scope of his contracts. As the sun rose over the horizon of the nearest planet, casting a golden glow over Serenity Station, Alara allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. Peace was a difficult, often thankless task, but as she watched the new day begin, she felt, more than ever, that it was worth every effort.